Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce Brian Lee. Brian comes to us from New Jersey, where he's a PhD student in the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton. He has a somewhat different background than a lot of our visitors in that he's an economist. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Economics from University of California at Davis, then was a Fulbright Scholar in Taiwan for 2 years, where he studied the interactions between conservation policies and farming livelihoods. He's published very widely for someone at his stage, which is impressive. And he's come down here to scope out possible dissertation topics, which is, I think, maybe one of the most envious stages of one's scientific career, the breadth of things you get to think about. So he's, as I said, published quite a bit on a number of topics, including green energy, afforestation and farm income, land value, and environmental degradation. Before I let him come and talk to us about agricultural economics in Taiwan and possible ideas for working here at Archbold, I will give you one tidbit from the title of one of his papers that may be interesting to talk to him about at the social hour. He has one titled "Underground Pipeline Explosions and Housing Prices," which I'm not an economist, but I bet it's not good for housing prices. So we can talk to him about that afterwards. Brian.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Josh. Can everyone hear me on Zoom?
I have a message they can hear Josh, so you're good.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Lee, and I just finished my first year of a PhD program in Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation. And the title of my presentation today is Agricultural Economics in Taiwan and Future Research in Florida. I did my master's degree in Taiwan, which is an island just off the coast of China in East Asia. And I studied agricultural economics at National Taiwan University in Taipei, Taiwan. And the figure on the right we see here is just a map of Taiwan and its geographic location in Greater East Asia. So as we can see, it's very close to countries like China, South Korea, and Japan. So the first topic that I'm going to be talking about in my presentation today is agricultural policy and farm household economics. And the reason why I decided to talk about these topics is that I think that many of the issues that affect farm households in Taiwan are also relevant to Florida. So I'm going to be talking about two papers today. The first paper is, does participation in agricultural cooperatives affect farm profitability, empirical evidence from Taiwan. And the second paper is the choice of marketing channel and farm profitability, empirical evidence from small farmers. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about the first paper in order. So agricultural cooperatives are really important organizations for farm households in both developed and developing countries. In many cases, agricultural cooperatives can increase the financial viability and solvency of farms. But previous research actually had really mixed results on the effect of agricultural cooperatives on farm profits. A lot of studies in sub-Saharan Africa have shown that agricultural cooperatives can increase farm profitability. But a lot of other studies in China suggested that there were basically null effects of agricultural cooperatives on farm profits. Furthermore, there was also little understanding or hypotheses on the precise mechanism through which agricultural cooperatives could possibly affect farm profitability. So my co-authors and I wanted to look at this question, and the question that we're interested in trying to answer is, how does participation in agricultural cooperatives affect farm profitability in Taiwan? If so, why? Agricultural cooperatives in Taiwan are just multi-purpose groups assisting producers with farming, financial, and marketing concerns. So I think the best way to kind of think about them in the context of Taiwan is they really just do anything to make farming a lot easier. So to start and to motivate this study, we began with qualitative interviews and a lot of discussions with farmers and Taiwan suggested that many of them were able to adapt food labels because of agricultural cooperatives. In particular, many of them cited the Taiwan Good Agricultural Practices, short for TGAP. TGAP is a food traceability and eco-labeling system by the Council of Agriculture, which just certifies that the produce is actually certified as healthy and safe under their rigorous standards. Producers can earn nearly 20% higher prices compared to non-certified produce. But one of the mechanisms through which agricultural cooperatives could plausibly impact membership in and adoption of these labels is that compliance with them is actually really, really difficult and takes about 11 steps from start to finish. Furthermore, many farms in Taiwan also work 2 jobs. So they work off the farm, usually working in a factory. And these challenges are just really, really difficult when working with such small scales. So the data and empirical model that we use includes a nationally representative data set of 9,946 family farms from the 2013 Maine Farms Household Survey in Taiwan. So we control for agricultural and socio-demographic characteristics, and this is really important because membership in agricultural cooperatives is non-random and is going to be correlated with both observed and unobserved characteristics. So we control for agricultural characteristics at the farm level, such as farm size and productivity of the farm itself. And we also control for individual and family characteristics, such as age, education, and the number of household members. We will go ahead and run 2 empirical models. So the first model that we run is called a treatment effect model. And then the second model is a causal mediation analysis. And the causal mediation analysis just tells us a little bit more about the potential mechanism through which agricultural cooperatives could affect farm profitability. So I'm going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about the models that we use in this paper. The treatment effect model starts when we calculate the probability that farmers decide to participate in agricultural cooperatives. And this is a 0 or 1 decision. People either participate in cooperatives or they do not. Then we go ahead and estimate farm profits, adjusting for the probability that people participate in cooperatives. The causal mediation analysis accounts for the difference in farm profits if there's a change in the use of food labels holding participation constant. Basically, what we're doing in this model is we keep everything the same except for whether a member of a cooperative is using food labels or not. So this diagram right here shows the structure of the mediation analysis, just to kind of illustrate how we think of like the direct and indirect associations between agricultural cooperatives and farm profitability in Taiwan. So the direct association is the association between agricultural cooperatives, which is our treatment variable, and farm profitability, which is our outcome variable. The indirect association, or the mediation effect, is the association between agricultural cooperatives through food labels, specifically TGAP, and farm profitability. So this table right here shows the result from these 2 models. So panel A estimates the treatment effect. So we can see that overall in column 1, agricultural cooperatives increase farm profitability. And furthermore, we go 1 step further and we look at basically what the effect of agricultural cooperatives are at different percentiles of the farm profit distribution. So basically, we're just comparing poorer farms and richer farms based on their position on the profit distribution. So we can actually see that these effects actually become larger as we continue along the farm profit distribution, suggesting that there are indeed increasing returns to scale to membership in agricultural cooperatives with respect to farm profitability. Panel B shows the decomposition results of the mediation analysis, and we can see that the mediation effect, or the effect of agricultural cooperatives through mechanisms such as food labels, can account from anywhere from 14.6 to 28.5% of the total association. And then the direct effect, or just some of the ways through which agricultural cooperatives support farm profitability through other mechanisms, can account for anywhere from 71.5 to 85.4%. To summarize the results from this paper, members of cooperatives receive higher farm profits compared to non-participants. Furthermore, there's evidence that this association is heterogeneous because these effects become larger for more profitable farms. And food labels, or TGAP, explain approximately 15% of the total association between participating in agricultural cooperatives and farm profits in Taiwan. The second paper that I'm going to talk about is called The Choice of Marketing Channel and Farm Profitability, Empirical Evidence from Small Farmers. And this was a paper that I wrote with Jae-Yoon Liu of the University of Minnesota and Hung Hao Chang of National Taiwan University that was published in Agribusiness. Marketing channels, or just the decision of how farmers choose to sell their products, is one of the most important decisions that they can make. It affects their costs, revenues, and a lot of other important aspects of their farm business. This also means that it has really important impacts on farm profitability. Most farms in developed countries sell their agricultural output through traditional marketing channels, which just generally means that at least one intermediary was involved. So in the case of maybe Florida's cattle ranching industry, it might include a processor or an auction market. However, policymakers have really been putting a lot of emphasis on marketing channels that provide specialty and value-added products for consumers, such as farmers markets. So the research questions that we try to answer here is, first, what are the determinants for farmers to use different marketing channels? So do they decide to sell to individual wholesalers, the wholesale market, or directly to consumers? The second research question that we try to answer is, what is the impact of different marketing channels on the distribution of farm profits? And the third research question that we're interested in looking at is, what's the potential mechanism possibly explaining the effects of marketing channels on farm profits? So this figure right here just shows the structure of agricultural marketing channels in Taiwan. So A actually shows the farmer selling to a wholesaler who will transport these products to the wholesale market, where they will finally reach the supermarket or consumer. B shows when the farmer will go ahead and sell directly to the wholesale market, and then workers at the wholesale market will go ahead and transport those products to the supermarket, where it's then purchased by the consumer. And C shows when the farmer actually sells directly to the supermarket or consumers themselves. So for some definitions, wholesalers grade, refrigerate, and store produce. Wholesale markets collect, distribute, and auction agricultural products. And direct marketing includes farmers markets, roadside stands, and community-supported agriculture in Taiwan. The data and empirical model that we use in this paper is administrative population-based data of 181,000 fruit and vegetable farms, so all fruit and vegetable farms from the 2015 Agricultural Census Survey in Taiwan. And just like in the previous paper, we control for agricultural characteristics at the farm level and socio-demographic characteristics at the head of household and individual level. The empirical model that we use is called a semi-parametric multi-value treatment effect model. So semi-parametric just means that I'm not imposing too many assumptions about the underlying distribution of my data. And then the multi-value treatment effect just refers to the fact that there's more than one treatment for this paper. So farmers can decide to sell to a wholesaler, a wholesale market, or they can sell directly to the consumer. To explain this model, first, we go ahead and calculate the probability that farmers use one of the three marketing channels based on their characteristics. Second, we estimate how this decision to sell to a particular marketing channel is associated with farm profit while adjusting for the probability of choosing one of these three marketing channels. Finally, weighted linear regression will go ahead and calculate the average treatment effect. So this table right here shows the estimated results of farm profits by different marketing channels. And panel A actually shows this based on the three marketing channels of whether a farmer will sell to a wholesaler, the wholesale market, or directly to consumers. So we can see that the most profitable marketing channel for farmers in Taiwan includes first, the wholesale market, second, the wholesaler, and finally, when the farmer sells directly to consumers, which is the least profitable marketing channel in Taiwan. Panel B just compares these farm profits across these marketing channels, and we can actually see that the biggest difference is when farmers choose to sell directly to consumers compared to farmers who sell directly to the wholesale market. The next part of this paper is we're really curious about why it is that farmers who sell directly to consumers is the least profitable marketing channel in Taiwan. And we think that this has to do with pesticides and fertilizer utilization in Taiwan. In Taiwan, agronomic inputs such as pesticides and fertilizers are actually subsidized by the government because of Taiwan's location as a tropical island with a lot of natural disasters, including very heavy flooding and typhoons. Thus, the Council of Agriculture and the Forestry Bureau actually subsidizes these inputs to kind of provide a little bit of insurance for many of these farmers. But consumers who are usually purchasing their products from direct-to-consumer marketing channels, such as farmers markets, probably don't want to buy products that are produced with these agronomic inputs. So we believe that the mechanism here is that producers who sell directly to farmers markets and directly to consumers will adjust their agronomic inputs. And because they're really heavily subsidized, this affects their profits. So to kind of provide suggested evidence of this result, we show the estimated results of pesticide and fertilizer utilization across the 3 marketing channels in Taiwan. So we can see that farmers who sell to consumers are 71.1% and 81.3% likely to use pesticides and fertilizers, whereas farmers who sell to the wholesale market are 91.6% and 93.9% likely to use these agronomic inputs. So to summarize the results from this paper, we show that direct marketing is associated with reduced profits in Taiwan. We believe that the explanation for this result is that farmers will go ahead and change the composition of their agricultural inputs from cheap products such as pesticides and fertilizers, which are subsidized by the government, to more expensive alternatives such as organic compost. These results also imply that policymakers trying to increase the profitability of direct marketing should subsidize other production costs associated with direct marketing. The second topic that I'm going to be talking about today is some previous research in environmental policy. And the title of the paper that I'm going to be talking about today is Participation in Afforestation Programs and the Distribution of Forest Farm Income. So this was a study that I wrote with Heng Hao Chang of National Taiwan University and Yi Tingxie, also of National Taiwan University, that was published in Forest Policy and Economics. Afforestation programs, or just policies where people are encouraging the planting of forests where there previously were none, is one of the most common policy interventions addressing some of the economic and environmental problems caused by deforestation. So one very famous example of this includes the Million Trees campaign. Usually, to kind of incentivize participation in these programs, policymakers will include some type of financial incentive, such as monetary payments, including direct payments or tax breaks. But there isn't too many studies that actually look at the causal impact of afforestation programs on participants' economic well-being. And prior studies don't take consideration of the fact that many of these forest farmers who are participating in these programs are going to be different than those who do not participate in them. So Mokhtan et al. Shows that there is a positive association between community-supported agriculture and forest farm profitability in Bhutan, but Liu et al. Shows that there's no impact within afforestation programs in China. So Taiwan implemented an afforestation program providing financial incentives for forest farm households to plant and maintain trees on plain and sloped land since 2009. But something that was really, really interesting to us is that when we just look at the summary statistics of forest farm households, we actually found that the average level of forest farm income was lower among participants compared to non-participants. And we were actually really curious about this because we know that farmers know their land the best. So we thought that if it's decreasing their income, well, why is that the case and why do they still decide to participate in the program, because participation rates in this program in Taiwan is slightly above 70%, which is very, very high for any type of public policy. So the research question that we're interested in looking at is, what is the causal impact of afforestation programs on the entire forest farm distribution in Taiwan? And when I say the entire forest farm distribution, we're lucky enough to be able to use a sample that includes every forest farmer or just someone who owns private forest land in Taiwan. Specifically, we look at mean. We look at the variance, so how much spread there is for forest farm income. We look at inequality calculated using a Gini coefficient, and we look at between quantile differences. So we just compare forest farmers at the 90th percentile and forest farmers at the 10th percentile to see what the difference in incomes are. So this figure right here kind of, illustrates the curious fact that really motivated the study, the fact that participants on average actually have lower forest farm incomes, and this is denoted by the solid black line. But non-participants on average, while they have higher forest farm incomes, if you look at the center and the right side of this figure, we can actually see that there's more ridges suggesting that there's more variance in their forest farm income. So to go into a few more specifics about the precise policy that was implemented in Taiwan, the Green Forestation Plan consists of two separate but very similar afforestation programs implemented at the same time, reforesting about 19,398 and 6,573 hectares of plain and sloped land respectively. So really importantly, and this is really crucial for our empirical model, certain types of land are prioritized for the program. So the Council of Agriculture and the Forestry Bureau prioritized agricultural and pastoral land in non-urban planning areas. They also prioritized special afforestation areas, and they also prioritized agricultural and pastoral land previously polluted or suffering from subsistence. Annual subsidies are then issued to participants for 20 years, ranging from 210,000 to 110,000 NTD, which is equivalent to about 7,000 to 3,667 US dollars. The data that we use is 32,209 forest farm households from the 2010 and 2015 agricultural census surveys in Taiwan. And just like the previous paper, we also control for agricultural, environmental, socio-demographic, and county level characteristics, because that's going to affect forest farm income as well as the decision to participate in this policy. The empirical model that we use is something called instrumental variables estimation, and I'm going to go ahead and just explain what that is in the next couple of slides. So instrumental variables estimation is used when an explanatory variable of interest, in this case, the Green Forestation Plan, is correlated with the error term. So in this case, we simply just cannot compare participants and non-participants, because participants and non-participants are going to differ based on observable and unobservable characteristics. Specifically, we were really concerned that the cost of participating in such a policy, because you're setting aside your forest land and placing restrictions on it, would actually be different based on these two groups. So instrumental variables estimation is commonly used when you have reverse causality. So variable A causes variable B, or variable B causes variable A. So for example, war might affect gross domestic product, but low gross domestic product will also affect the probability of warfare. It's also used to tackle omitted variable bias. So when you're missing a variable C, and that's the case that we're kind of worried about here, and this type of modeling can also be used when we have non-random measurement error. And this just occurs when a variable of interest, such as variable A, is inaccurately measured and correlated with another variable. A valid instrument will induce changes in the explanatory variable of interest, but has no effect on the dependent variable. So this approach identifies the causal effect of an explanatory variable interest on the dependent variable. So this figure actually shows like a visualization of the instrumental variables estimation, including the instrument that we use, the treatment, and the outcome of interest. So the instrumental variable that we use is whether a county is located in an agricultural priority zone. The treatment is participation in the Green Forestation Plan, and the outcome of interest is forest farm income. So we make the argument that whether a forest farm is located in agricultural priority zone, that's going to affect our participation in this policy, but it will have no direct or indirect effect on forest farm income. So to explain and to justify this choice of an instrument, because this really is the key assumption that kind of reinforces this paper, the instrument or agricultural priority zones were decided in 2000 by the Council of Agriculture and the Forestry Bureau in Taiwan. So participation in the Green Forestation Plan should be affected by the presence of agricultural priority zones because the government is actually targeting these type of lands for participation in the program. But because this criterion, agricultural priority zones, was decided by the government, we believe that it is unlikely that it's going to affect forest farm incomes, which is an individual family level outcome more than 10 years later. And I want to acknowledge that this is a really strong assumption. So we go ahead and employ several robustness checks to kind of prove that this is indeed valid and strong. So the main robustness check is we go ahead and limit our subsample of forest farmers to those who do not receive any payments from the program. And then we include the treatment in our model and we show that there's no statistically significant relationship between the instrument and the outcome of interest, which is forest farm income. So the results from this paper are shown right here. So the main thing that I want to highlight is we can see in column B, the results can be interpreted as something called the local average treatment effect. So the average treatment effect for those who decide to participate in the program. So for those who decided to participate in the program, it reduced their forest farm income by 17.9%. But it reduced the variance in their forest farm income by even more, by about 29.6%. And we believe that this is kind of the explanation on why these forest farmers still choose to participate in this program. The next part of this paper is we conduct something called a profile analysis. So anytime there is a public policy, one question that we always think about is additionality. So is this policy just encouraging, extra, conservation, or is it really just, paying people for practices that they were going to do anyway? So we divide the sample into compliers. So these are individuals who are more likely to participate in a policy if targeted by the government or some other body. Never takers, those who are never going to comply with the government's policy, and always takers who are always going to save their forest land. So the profile analysis actually shows that women with lower levels of education are more likely to change their mind and participate in this program if targeted by the government. So to summarize these results, the Green Forestation Plan reduced the mean level of forest farm income for participants in Taiwan. There was even larger effects on reducing the variance in forest farm income. Thus, we believe that the high coverage and the high participation of this program is really driven by the stabilization effect. And we believe that this is the case because the program actually provides annual subsidies to these forest farmers for 20 years, which is a really long time. So just to put this up there, I have some other studies on farmland prices and housing prices. And the reason why I just wanted to very quickly mention them today is because I know this is really relevant to conservation issues here in Florida. So I have a paper on whether COVID-19 affects farmland prices. I also have another paper on drought management strategies and climate change adaptation in farmland prices. And I also have another paper on solar farms and farmland prices. And then finally, I have a last paper on housing prices that looks at underground pipeline explosions that Josh mentioned in the introduction. So this final part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about some future research ideas that I have in Florida. So I'm really interested in doing research at the intersection of agricultural economics and conservation science. And I think cattle ranching and the Florida Greenways Network and the Florida Wildlife Corridor are really just excellent case studies to examine these interactions and these relationships. So one challenge is that, of course, we all know that the Florida Wildlife Corridor and conserved lands have many economic benefits. But within the context of an academic study, sometimes it's really, really difficult to explicitly quantify these ecosystem services. For example, we don't exactly have a market price for clean water, and we also don't have a market price for other really important things such as healthy wildlife populations. So one of the things that I'm interested in maybe doing is using applied econometric techniques to either directly or indirectly understand the causal impact of the Florida Wildlife Corridor and conserved lands in Florida on some type of economic outcome of interest. So the first research idea that I've been thinking about is looking at the causal impact of the Florida Wildlife Corridor on residential housing prices. So many people are moving to Florida to enjoy the state's green space and nature, but this influx of people, about 1,000 a day, is really putting a lot of pressure and really threatening some of the same amenities that people are, moving down here for, specifically through development and housing. So the research question that I've been thinking about is maybe identifying the causal impact of conserved lands, specifically through the Florida Wildlife Corridor, on residential housing prices. And the reason why I think that this has conservation implications is that it may encourage developers to really think about how conserved lands can also benefit residential housing prices, and may, encourage them to just think about how they design urban development and so forth. So the challenge is that comparisons between conserved and non-conserved lands won't pick up on observable and non-observable differences between residential housing prices at the county level. And I'm a little bit concerned about this within an academic study, just because the decision to conserve land is really, a non-random decision. But the key point that I'm going to try to make is that the closing date of many acquired and conserved lands is somewhat random because of legal and logistical issues. So something that I learned while I was down here is that, kind of finalizing these agreements can take anywhere from months to years, depending on some of the challenges that are going on with working through such a complicated issue. So the empirical approach that I'm thinking of using is exploiting quasi-random spatial and temporal variation in the coverage of acquired and conserved lands across Florida to kind of estimate the causal impact of conserved lands on residential housing prices in this context. So basically, this approach would allow me to kind of take advantage of the fact that the area of conserved lands varies somewhat randomly across units and time. And then this is basically just a social scientist version of the treatment control before after, which is commonly used in ecological studies. So the data that I'm thinking about using for this research question would include data on the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So something that's fantastic about Florida is that they have some of the most complete records of conserved lands within the state. So specifically, I am considering using the Florida Conserved Lands Map, as well as the Florida Natural Areas Inventory Map. In addition, I'm also going to be using data on housing prices. So the US Department of Housing and Urban Development has county level housing prices. And then I would also pair that with county level economic and socio-demographic variables. And of course, I will also consider controlling for housing supply, just because I really want to understand the impact of conserved areas rather than just constraints on housing supply with respect to Florida. Another research question that I've been thinking about is cattle ranching in Florida. And I think that cattle ranching really shows how agriculture and livestock practices can really achieve economic and environmental goals. And I think, generally speaking, there isn't enough, scholarly work showing the importance of cattle ranching for, both agriculture and conservation in Florida. So much of this opportunity land within the Florida Wildlife Corridor overlaps with private land owned by cattle ranchers. So one question is, raising the profitability of cattle ranching is really, really important both for them and their families, as well as the success of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So one broad research question that I'm thinking about is maybe looking at the relationship between biodiversity, conservation practices and programs, and economic profit among cattle ranchers in Florida. So I hope to learn and partner with organizations such as the Florida Cattlemen's Association on conducting some type of survey, collecting agricultural, economic, and ecological data on cattle ranchers. The broad research question that I'm thinking about is, what is the relationship between biodiversity, conservation practices and programs, and economic profit for cattle ranchers in Florida? And I think that it would be really interesting to kind of look at this across several dimensions, for example, based on ranch size as well as the type of ranch as well. Another broad research topic that I've been thinking about includes conservation and income smoothing and variability of cattle ranchers. So one quote that really stuck with me while I was down here is someone told me that conservation can be the difference between being in the black or being in the red. But surprisingly, data from the US Department of Agriculture doesn't really collect information on a lot of different types of conservation payments. And this includes hunting leases, as well as payments for ecosystem services, such as the Florida Ranchlands payments for ecosystem services. So we don't really have too much of an understanding between the relationship of conservation payments and cattle ranching profits. So one thing that I noticed in the academic literature is that agricultural economists don't usually think of conservation payments as something that could reduce income variability, or just, how many questions that cattle ranchers may have about their yearly profits. So usually people think of programs such as crop insurance. But conservation payments can protect ranchers from the instability of inputs, including energy, feed, fertilizer, people, and freight. So one of the research questions that I've been thinking about is, can conservation payments smooth and reduce income variability for ranchers? Why or why not? And maybe what are some of the barriers to receiving these payments in the first place? Another sub-question that I've been thinking about within this context is, how can researchers really design surveys that are easier and simpler to complete with oversampled population? Because I know that these ranchers are donating their time, and I want to make sure that this process is as easy as possible and can be helpful for them as well. And finally, the last research topic that I've been thinking about is cattle ranchers' preferences for innovative conservation tools. So the Florida Wildlife Corridor Summit discussed the development of novel and innovative conservation tools. But I think that one important question is, we're not entirely sure what cattle ranchers prefer in terms of these innovative conservation programs. So some of the specific levers that were mentioned included carbon markets, corridor-specific payments for ecosystem services, nature-based tourism, and wildlife-compatible solar development. I'm thinking of using a conjoint analysis, which is very common in market research, which will quantify respondents' preferences for certain policies or programs. And I just want to go ahead and thank the many people who made this visit special, everybody at Archbold Biological Station and Buck Island Ranch, in particular, Dr. Joshua Daskin, who is probably the best friend, fixer, and guide that someone could ask for, Laura Reed, Nova Jones, Jim Strickland, Dr. Hilary Swain, Jean Lolis, Dr. Betsy Boughton, Emily Angel, Joe Guthrie, and Dr. Aaron David. And I'd also like to thank my advisor, Dr. David Wilkov, and the rest of my lab group for encouraging me to go to Florida and telling me about how amazing of a field site this is. And if you have any questions about anything that I said today, my email is bsld@princeton.edu. Thank you so much.
We have some time for questions, so I'll let Brian field his own, and some in the room and some online. Here.
Yeah.
Great talk. Basic questions about these cooperatives that you talked about in the first part. What is is there any difference in say quality of products with these cooperatives? Are they strictly what is the actual thing that they're doing?
Yeah.
Cooperative farm or non-cooperative farm. Is there anything functional aside from being part of it?
Yeah, so it really.
Would you repeat the question so people can hear you by the microphone?
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. So yeah, the question was whether there's any difference between cooperatives, especially with respect to the products that are being produced, or are they, yeah. Yeah, so like for the most part, like quality is going to, vary at the farm levels. So like in terms of the cooperatives, the thing is that like we just mostly, and this is kind of the case in Taiwan, is that it's just an organization. So like farm quality is really going to vary a lot at the farm level. But to answer the question, like certain cooperatives might be, have better quality, but like, that's one limitation of the study. So.
So I'm sort of intrigued with the doing surveys to test ranchers' preferences for certain conservation strategies. So there are probably some innate cultural preferences, but there's also a lot of preferences that are going to be driven by economic impacts on how much they have to contribute, utilization of land. So and I'm not familiar with a lot of those different approaches. So to what extent are ranchers educated before you give them that? And how do you do that without biasing the results in the
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the common approaches, especially with something like a conjoint analysis, is also pairing it with qualitative interviews as well. So allowing ranchers to maybe, express their opinion and having the opportunity to listen to them, because that's definitely something that is really important to consider, whether there's a possibility of biasing if you're kind of showing like a bunch of different possible conservation levers. And we kind of just want to make sure that we're not phrasing questions in a way that could possibly induce that. So that's something that is going to be important to consider.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? So if we look at polling data, people come out with a response, and then they're given more education, and you re-poll, and often the response has changed. So is it possible in these surveys that we can use, pre-outreach and pre-sort of education programs? What are people's responses, and then how did they respond afterwards? Is that allowed in economics, or are you leading the witness too much?
Yeah, that's definitely allowed, and that's really popular with this type of method, just because you're trying to understand preferences for certain products or policies. And oftentimes not everybody is going to have like the same level of knowledge. For example, within this context, not everyone may know what the discussion is about, solar farms on cattle ranch lands, or like wildlife specific payments for ecosystem services. So there's definitely a balance between being specific and being general with these type of surveys, but it's often the case where people kind of do prime their respondents to kind of see, what they may prefer.
So I'm thinking a little bit about the cooperatives again, or no, I guess it's the second piece. It's the market chains, right?
Yes.
Sell directly to the consumer or sell to the wholesaler or wholesale market. You talked about sort of the farm level implications for the farmer. What about sort of the whole economy implications? Is it better for the farming community, everybody in that chain, if there's a short chain or a long chain? And I'm thinking about that, one of the analogies in Florida, should a farmer sell directly to market or not? And if you don't, do you actually support economically more people of an agricultural economy?
Yeah, so the question is asking about the value chain in the choice of marketing channel for farmers in Taiwan, and whether that decision also has implications for rural economies. Is that correct?
Yeah, and do you support more, a greater number of people one way or the other, in addition to your good result about the individual farmers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the important thing to remember is that direct marketing is still overall a very, very small percentage of, farm level, decisions in Taiwan. So generally speaking, I don't think that the choice to kind of move away from, direct marketing will really kind of result in agricultural linkage impacts across the broader rural economy, but that's definitely something worth considering in the future.
follow up on Josh's question and ask about aggregating. So you're very much at the farm level. But I'm interested in, and I sort of was really interested in your comments, is can conservation as a business smooth that annual variability? But I'm also interested at what happens at a county or a regional level. You know, at what point there may be a threshold at which agriculture is not viable. It's too small of a percentage in a region that's actually in agriculture. So I'd be interested in your comments on how to aggregate and to scale this, because getting above those thresholds is going to be as important. And how does everybody's individual contribution help you get above those thresholds? So I realize it's a hard question.
Yeah, so that's a really provocative question and really thoughtful. So thank you so much. So the question was in terms of, excuse me. Sorry, can you quickly repeat the question?
Yeah, how can you look at aggregating all those individual farmer information to ask the same questions at a local or regional scale, whether you've got a critical mass of agriculture that's sufficient for long-term sort of economic return? So I don't know how one tackles that, but I worry that agriculture our loss of citrus means we've lost a huge amount of agriculture. Does that jeopardize the whole of agriculture in a region?
Yeah, so that definitely could be the case in Florida. So within the case of Taiwan, I just think that counties and townships are already so specialized that, you know, like the critical mass is kind of already there. Like, you know, like a large percentage of people in a county will be working in agriculture. So I don't think that challenge is quite present in Taiwan, but it would be really interesting to kind of think about county level analyses and trying to see whether, for example, within the context of Florida, like changes in, you know, agriculture correlate to changes in urbanization and just how that, you know, impacts rural economies. So that's definitely something to think about.
Done economic analysis at the sub-farm level, like within the farm, looking at different practices that are applied.
Yeah, so that's like actually like a really big topic within agricultural economics, just because like intra-farm household decisions. So for example, this might include having mom work on the farm and, you know, having dad work at the factory is something that's really, really important. So we have a paper that's looking at that with respect to like a rural labor program and how that affects, you know, labor force participation in Taiwan. But for these papers, we don't look at that, but that would be something really interesting to consider.
Thanks, Brian, one more time.
All right, everybody, we're done. Thank you for attending today. Thanks, Brian. And stay tuned to our webpage and social media for announcements of our September seminars. Have a great day, everybody.